Masechet Yevamot, Daf Nun Vav. We're discussing this opening Mishnah about someone who performs Yibum, but he doesn't realize that doesn't have intention to perform the mitzvah, or in some other way it's a done in a deficient way. And yet it says Chad Gomer Kana, and it works. And so now we're going to analyze, what does it mean Kana? Is it for all purposes? They're fully married for all reason, in all manners, or is there something deficient about this Yibum itself? For example, if he is a Kohen, can she, the Yevama, eat Terumah? If she's a Bat Yisrael, she can only eat Terumah if she's married to a Kohen, so she was able to when she was married to the first husband. Now that he died, she is not able to eat Terumah. Now, when the Yavam does some kind of insufficient Yibum, so yes, they are married for some reasons that let's say she has co-wives, they can go ahead and marry anybody else, but she herself, can she marry Terumah? This eat Terumah, that will be the subject of a machloket. We're going to see two versions of this machloket. The question is, what does deficient Yibum accomplish? Version number one is going to apply the machloket when she only had kiddushin with the deceased. Version two, when she actually married the deceased. After that, we're going to ask a question: when can a wife of a deaf kohen eat terumah? And then in what ways are adayot like Yevama? Because the Mishnah compares the two. And that'll lead to a discussion of the status of a Kohen's wife who was raped. Can she remain married to the Kohen? Okay, so we begin. Echad ha'me'arev, echad ha'gomer kana. So quoting from the Mishnah, my kana, and what does it mean kana? Rav amar kana lakol, ushmuel amar lo kana ela ledvarim ha'amurim b'parasha, lirash b'nechse achiv lo potra min ha'yibum. So what does it mean when we say he has acquired her? Even though the quote from the Mishnah is about partial or full insertion, it's actually not talking about that case specifically, because whatever you consider me'areh, that's it. It's the same as gomer. So that's not called a partial yibum, even though it's only partial insertion. It's rather talking about the first cases where there's a deficiency in the state of mind that he did not have intention to do yibum. So Rav says it's fully married. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have intention. Shmuel says no. This only accomplishes the things that are specifically mentioned in the Pisukim regarding Yibum, which is that he will inherit his brother's assets as long as he does some act of bi'ah with her. Even if he doesn't have intention to do Yibum, he does acquire the acts of his property, and she no longer has to do Yibum with any other brothers. They cannot do it, and her co-wives all can go marry. Okay, so now here's version 1. Mina nisuin l'divrei kol achla tehavat ka'achla meikara. If she was married, the Yevama was originally married to the first husband, and so she was eating terumah. Then, after he dies, and the Yavam does this insufficient yibum, everyone agrees, Rav and Shmuel will agree, that she can now once again eat terumah, because she was able to eat terumah before. So now the yibum just continues the same relationship that she had before, and she could eat terumah before, and now she could eat terumah again. Ki pelige mina erusin. The machloket is only where she only had kiddushin with the first husband, and he died, and so she was not able to eat terumah while she was mikudeshet. The problem of someone having terumah while she's mikudeshet, even though they're pretty much married, even after kiddushin, the main problem is that when she's home, she's still living at home with her parents, and therefore if we allow her to eat terumah, she's going to go and get terumah and bring it home, and then other people in her household, her father, her parents' home, will eat may eat the terumah by mistake, and so that's why we don't want that to happen. So that's the machloket. She was not able to eat terumah while she was only mikudeshet. Now this Yavam comes and does a deficient yibum. Rav amar ochelet. Yeah, this deficient yibum, Rav says, but now it is a yibum. Doesn't matter that it was somehow deficient and mentally, that he didn't have in mind. Now she's married. Married for the other purposes of Yibum, and married for all purposes. And she couldn't eat terumah from the first husband, but she can eat terumah from the Yavam. And what's the reason? Well, because we already saw the derivation earlier on Nun Dalid that says Yevama yavo alea, from that phrase the Braita learned ben b'shogeg, ben mezid, ben onus, ben dason, even if he was forced into it. It doesn't matter, the yibum still takes effect. And therefore, once it takes effect, it takes full effect, and they're fully married. So just like if they're married, shikiri terumah, so too this yibum. Shmuel says no. The pasuk only comes to say that she can be, the yavam can take the place of the husband, and so whatever connection the original husband had, now this deficient yivum can also accomplish, but not more than that. And since she was only had kiddushin with the first husband and was not able to eat terumah, therefore this deficient yibum will only accomplish enough that the other co-wives can go ahead and shed her yibum is done. She wouldn't need yibum from another brother, but it's not so powerful that it'll make them married so that she could eat terumah. All right, so that's Shemuel. Now we're going to see first show that Shemuel is consistent with his own opinion, and then we're going to have a challenge to Shemuel that he will answer. Shemuel is consistent. Amarav Nachman, Amarav Shemuel. Kol she'abal ma'achil, Yavam ma'achil. V'kol she'en abal ma'achil, Yavam eno ma'achil. Shemuel said that anything that the husband was able to allow her to take part of, meaning if the husband was allowed her to eat terumah, then when she does yibum, the yavam also, when they're obviously kohanim because they're paternal brothers, so then the yavam also can, and anything that the original husband cannot have her eat, also the yavam will not have her eat. In other words, the yibum only accomplishes brings her up to the level that she was with the original husband, but not more. Good. And now here is a challenge from a braita. Two people who are full mind when at a point when they did kiddushin. Good. So the kiddushin is 100%. But between the kiddushin and the nisuin, which would be several months, he became a deaf mute. In those days, that would mean that he's not mentally competent. Nowadays, it doesn't mean that, but it's in those days the category is the same, and so now he is not fully competent to go ahead and do full nisuin. Ena ochelet, so therefore she cannot eat terumah. Met v'nafla lifnei yavam cheresh ochelet. If the original husband dies the whole time that they're together, they can be together, but because he can't accomplish 100% nisuin, she cannot eat the terumah. If the original husband dies, and then she goes to the yavam cheresh, ochelet, and falls to the yavam, and the yavam is a deaf person, then she can eat. So this is quite an interesting thing. Even though she was not able to eat terumah with the original husband, now that the yavam does yibum, it can. And so quite ironically, the power of the yavam is even greater than that of the baal. That because yibum, here's the chidush, right? Yibum, as we just learned, does not require mental competence. Even if someone is forced or doesn't know what they're doing, the yibum still is effective. The act of bi'ah still makes yibum and has the effect of, according to this baraita, a full marriage, to the point that even if he's cheresh, doesn't matter, he can eat terumah. Okay, so you see that this bishlamai l'Rav Nicha, this fits Rav perfectly fine, who says that even the deficient act of yibum creates a full marriage. So too, here, this is a deficient act of yibum because he is a haresh, and nevertheless, it affects a full marriage. Ela lishmuel kashya, but this is difficult for Shemuel to explain, because since Shemuel said that a yavam only has up to the power of the original husband and not more. A deficient yibum, that is, a deficient yibum only brings it up to that level and not more. So cheresh here, he should say, does a deficient yibum, and only should bring it up to the level of what the original husband was, who was also a cheresh, and just like she could not eat terumah before, she should not be able to eat terumah now. All right, it's a good question. Amar lach Shemuel, ema hachi, I have an answer. Velo ispik lechonsa ad shenit haresh, ena ochelet bitrumah. Oh, Shemuel's going to add a couple of words, one phrase into the braita, and say as follows: if he did not get a chance to marry her until he became cheresh, then she cannot eat terumah. That we have in the braita. And he adds, if he did marry her fully and only became deaf afterwards, ochelet, then she can continue eating, because he was competent when the time that they consummated the marriage, so they're fully married, and the fact that he became deaf afterwards has no effect. And it's on that phrase that it says mit v'nafla lifnei yavam cheresh ochelet. If in that case where she was able to eat terumah with the original husband and he died, and then the yavam comes and he's a cheresh, then she eats, because it's bringing it up to the same level as the previous relationship. And the previous relationship, she was able to eat terumah. Therefore, even though this is a deficient yibum, because he is cheresh, nevertheless, it's deficient yibum, brings it up to a level, and the level was the same, so therefore she can eat terumah. So this makes sense, and fits with what Shemuel said above, because above even also he said that if they were married before, and then the original husband died, and then someone does a deficient yibum, she can eat terumah, because it brings it up all the way to the top level. It's only if they were had kiddushin and died, and then does a deficient yibum, that's where it doesn't, because that would be similar to cheresh. Okay, good. Last question, and this ikad amre, umay bezo. What do you mean in this way? Here, in this way, the yavam is greater than the baal. See, this made sense according to Rav, because according to Rav, the yavam can actually affect a full marriage, even though he's deaf, in a way that the original husband couldn't. So it makes sense for Rav, but Shemuel, how is he going to explain this? The yavam is not any more powerful than the original husband, it's only as powerful. And he'll answer, De'ilu bal cheresh meikara lo ochelet, vilu yavam cheresh meikara achela. No, he can still explain this. What he means is that if someone were deaf originally, they would not be able to marry a woman and allow her to eat terumah. But if he's a yavam and takes a woman who was able to eat terumah with the original husband, then he can do yibum and he can have his wife eat terumah. So the yavam, a deaf yavam, can affect a full marriage, while a regular person, not yavam, cannot affect a full marriage. And so Shemuel can explain this baraita perfectly well. Good. Now we have a second version of that entire machloket and the entire question and answer. So other version is that if she was only engaged to the original husband, then everyone agrees. Rav and Shemuel agree that when you do this deficient yibum, she will not be able to eat terumah, because she wasn't able to eat terumah even beforehand. So the yibum is not going to be any stronger than the original relationship. But they do argue, if she was married to the original guy and she was able to eat terumah, Rav amar ochelet. Rav says she continues the havat achla meikara. She was able to eat terumah before, so the guy does yibum, even deficient yibum. It continues what we had before. Rav here is similar to Shemuel's opinion in the first version. U'Shmuel amar ena ochelet ki rabe rachamana bi'at shogeg kemezid lidvarim hamurim b'parasha aval lechol mileh lo. Shmuel says no, she cannot, even though she was married to the first guy and was able to eat terumah with the first husband. Now, in the meantime, she's shomeret yavam, she stops, she cannot have terumah. And when the Torah adds and says shogeg is like mezid, right, doing it without intention to do yibum. Here, the terms are used slightly differently than they were in the Mishnah. When you had no intention to do yibum, it's like you did have intention and it works. That's only for what's mentioned in the Torah itself, which is that she performed yibum. The brothers don't have to. The co-wives can go free. But not for everything, not for eating terumah if he's a kohen. Okay, so that's now Shemuel's opinion. Shemuel, hold on. Shemuel here seems to contradict now what Shemuel said elsewhere, where he said, Kol shehaba'al ma'achil yavam ma'achil. He said that is there any relationship, as long as with the first husband, that allowed her to eat terumah, the Yavam also, once he does Yibum, also can allow her to eat Terumah. But here it's not true. She was able to eat Terumah with the first husband, to whom she was fully married, and now she can't with this deficient Yibum. So Emma, let's explain it. Kol bi'ah she'abal ma'achil ba, Yavam ma'achil ba. V'chol bi'ah she'en abal ma'achil ba, en ha'yavam ma'achil ba. Oh, we can still explain Shemuel's statement in this way. Any act of bi'ah that the original husband, if he did that and married her, she would be able to eat terumah. So too, the Yavam also, if he does that type of act of bi'ah, meaning with full intention, if someone would come and do bi'ah with her with full intention to marry her as nisuin, she could eat terumah. So too, a Yavam who has full intention to do yibum and take her as a wife, then yes, that will work. But but any type of bi'ah that had a mindset that the original husband would not have been able to fully acquire her as a husband, right? For example, if he was some bi'ah by mistake or with no intention, if he had intention just as zinut and not to marry her, then they would not be married, and she would not be able to eat terumah. So too the Yavam in a similar case cannot do it. So that's what Shemuel meant, that you need the same mindset for both. Okay, so that's a fine answer. And now we have a challenge from the Braita that we will not be able to answer this time. Eti bebat Israel pikachat shenit aresa lekohen pikeach lo hispik lekonsa ad shenit charesh ena ochelet. So same as before, they were of full mind when they were engaged, but by the time they came to the marriage, he became deaf. So now they cannot fulfill a full marriage, and now Chelet, she cannot have terumah. They can stay together, but cannot have terumah. Met v'nafla lifnei Yavam charesh or Chelet. If he died, and then she falls to a Yavam, and he is deaf, she can eat terumah. So you see that Yavam has a greater strength even than the Baal. She's able to eat with the Yavam that she wasn't able to eat with the Baal. Okay, now for Rav here, we'll have to add those same words. We'll have to add a phrase and says, oh, if she did get married while he was competent, and only he became deaf afterwards, then and then dies, then where the Yavam Cheresh can do Yibum and she will eat, right? So according to Rav, you add that phrase in, and that would be fine, because Rav in this version is the same as Shemuel in the previous version. Ela li Shemuel kashya, but it's impossible to explain this baraita according to Shemuel. And so we leave that as a difficulty and without any solution. All right, and next we have a baraita. We're going to talk about what we came up here. When can the wife of a deaf kohen eat terumah is the question. So tenora banan bat Yisrael pikachat shenit arsa lekohen pikeach. So similar to the baraita we just said, that a woman who is full competence and a man who's full competence, they do erusin. V'lo speak lechon shit charesh, and then he became deaf before the wedding, and she will not be able to have terumah. Nolad laben ochelet, but once she has a child, now she can eat terumah. The reason is because the child can eat terumah, because after all, he is the son of a kohen, so he's a kohen himself. And now, because she is the mother, so now they're a family. And even if the husband dies, let's say a regular case where a woman is married to a kohen, a bat Yisrael to a kohen, she can eat terumah. They have a child. The husband dies. She can continue to eat terumah because there is a child. If there is no family member, then she goes back to her father's house and she has to stop eating terumah. As long as there is a family member, a husband or a child, she can continue eating terumah. Good, so everyone agrees with that. Here's the question. Met haben, now this child dies, she is alive, and she has this only partial marriage because the husband is charesh. So once her child dies, Rabbi Natan omer ochelet, she can continue eating terumah. Chachamim omerim and now Chachamim said no, now she has to stop. So Chachamim, we understand, makes sense when because she was not fully married, because at the time of consummation of the marriage, he became a haresh. So since the marriage was deficient, therefore she cannot eat terumah. If there is a child alive, she can eat because from the force of the child. Father dies, she cannot. If the child dies, she cannot eat anymore. So that makes perfect sense. But how about Rabbi Natan? Why does he say she can because she once had a child alive, now she can continue? Why? Ma'ita Mad Rabbi Natan. So he says, because she was already able to eat, so that if there was no child, she was not able to eat because she wasn't fully married. Now that there is a child, so that brings her fully into the family, and now since she was already able to eat, we continue, because after all, she is still married to the husband, even whatever you call that deficiency. But she started eating, so she doesn't have to stop. Abaye says, that doesn't make any sense. You're not giving any logic. According to your logic, let's say a regular case, Bat Yisrael, who's married to a fully competent Kohen, full marriage, so she can eat terumah, and then he dies. Should she continue eating because she was already able to eat? So too here, she could only eat on account of the force of the child, and the child is gone, so she has to stop. So he doesn't understand that logic. Ela kevan demit le pakat le kedushate mineh hachaname kevan demit le pakat kedushate mineh. Rather, Abaye says, just like when she's fully married to a husband and then he dies, that love sanctity leaves her and she has to stop. So too here, where as long as she has the child, fine, but once the child dies, she no longer is connected to that sanctity and she has to stop eating terumah. So that rejects Rabba's answer. Elama Rav Yosef. Second answer. Kasavar binatan nisu'e haresh ma'achelin betrumah velo gazrinin nisu'e haresh atu kiddushe haresh. Or maybe the binatan actually thinks that the nisu'in themselves, even though there's a deficiency in the nisu'in because it was done by a deaf person, nevertheless she was able to eat terumah in the first place. Okay, we're going to ask in a second that why does the binatan only say something about after he had a child and then dies? Right? He should have been asking a question. He should have been arguing right up at the beginning. Right? When it says and not ochelet, the binatan says ochelet. Okay, so we're going to see that in a second. But right now, let's explain it. Why is that permitted? Because what's the whole problem? Really, on the biblical level, even after just kiddushin, she should be able to eat. She's basically married to the Kohen, so she is now like Eshet Kohen, and she should be able to eat terumah, even when they're only engaged. The problem is that we're worried, the gezerah, because she's still living in her parents' house, that she'll bring terumah home, and for her brother, her father, her mother will eat some terumah. But here, there's no need to make a gezerah, because she is living with her husband. And so it doesn't matter if it's not 100% nisu'in, she is on a biblical level allowed, and there's no reason to make a gezerah here. Lo gazrin an nisu'e cheresh, and we're not going to make a gezerah to prohibit the deaf person who's married, because it might lead to a deaf person who has kiddushin to eat it, because that will just be a gezerah to another gezerah. You don't have to go that far, and that's what Rabbi Natan says, and that's why even after the child dies, so what? Even before the child was born, he was allowed to eat. Okay, so we understand the logic, but this one has a textual problem. It doesn't fit so well. Amar le Abaye ihachi nolad la ben la malir. Abaye says, then why does it have to be that she had a child? Even before she had a child, she was able to. So we say mishum rabbanan, we only mentioned the child because the child case because of rabbanan, who say that she cannot eat unless she has a child. So that's why I mentioned the case of child. Okay, fine. Yeah, but the Binatan should have, right at the outset, when you mention her before the child was born, the Binatan should have said, I allow even there. Just right after the Nisu'in, permitted. So we try to answer, maybe we wanted to allow Rabbanan to finish his entire argument, say the whole case. It's prohibited when they get married, permitted when they have a child, prohibited again after the child dies. And then, so after the Rabbanan say their piece, then will Rabbi Natan. So it's just a stylistic thing. So we say that also doesn't work. If you wanted to finish the Rabbanan first, then you should have fully finished it and only have Rabbi Natan at the end. But instead, actually, you bring case 1, where she gets married, case 2 where they have a child, and then the Binatan argues on that, and then case 3 Chachamim say ana ochelet. So you see, you're not waiting for Rabbanan to finish their piece. Rabbanan is stuck in anyway. So if Rabbanan is interrupting, they should have interrupted it after the first case, and so the style style cannot be fit. The wording cannot be fit into, and therefore kashya, we leave it as a question to the binatan. Okay, and then now the next topic, which is in what ways are adayot like a Yevama? Because here you do have a comparison, and you say if you have these various states of mind, or if you have a not full intercourse, kana, and then we say, and so too with other adayot and pisulot, and there's no difference between bi'ah and bi'ah. So what we're going to have to analyze is what this vechen, what is the force of the vechen? Is it only on, see it says lo chilek ben bi'ah le bi'ah, is that the only similarity, just like this also, there's no difference between bi'ah and bi'ah, and it doesn't matter if it was me'areh and gomed, is that what the comparison is? And they're different regarding the 4 states of mind, or is the comparison even for the 4 states of mind, that all these 4 states of mind also will be, that work for Yibum also would be prohibited if done with adayot and pisulot. Okay, so let's see, and that will lead to the question about status of a Kohen's wife who was raped. So here we go. Vechen haba alachat mikol adayot. The vechen. Amar Rav Amram, hamileta amar lan Rav Sheshat ve'anhiru la'ayinin mimatnitin. He's going to report the following thing that Rav Sheshat taught him, and based on this, he gave us a really enlightening insight into our very Mishnah. Eshet Yisrael shenensa, af al pi shemuteret leba'ala pesura lekehuna. A wife of a Yisrael who was raped. Even she is allowed to go back to her husband. See, if she committed adultery on purpose, then she's prohibited to her husband. But if it was it was coerced, she can go back to her husband. Nevertheless, she becomes pesula lekehuna. If he dies afterwards and she becomes a widow, she cannot marry a kohen. If she was a bat kohen, she cannot go back to her father's house and eat terumah. So that's a chumrah regarding status, kehuna status, that rape, even though no fault of her own and no reason to penalize her, she didn't do anything wrong. Nevertheless, that's the deal with kehuna. She is pisula. Good. Ve'tana tuna. And we, the Tana, already taught us this. V'chen haba alachat mikol ayot amot b'Torah or pisulot. In our Mishnah, when it says v'chen, whatever was true with Yibum, Yevama, is true also with other adayot and pisulot. Pisulot meaning something that would cause a problem, someone to be prohibited to marry a kohen. My vechen, and so this vechen, what is it comparing? My lav lo shena b'shogeg, v'lo shena b'mezid, v'lo shena be'ones, v'lo shena b'rason, v'katane pesula. So maybe the vechen has full force and saying all the 4 categories that apply to Yibum, and that would mean even honest. Right? If someone forces either the Yavam or the Yevama or both to do Yibum and they didn't want to, nevertheless, the Yibum sticks. It is valid. And so too, this says Vechen, so too, someone who is forced to do something prohibited, nevertheless, Pesala, she becomes prohibited to marry a Kohen, even though she was forced. So there you go. We have a proof from the Mishnah that a forced adultery causes a woman to be prohibited to a kohen. Okay, so that's the proof. But then we end up rejecting and saying, not necessarily. Lo, my vechen, it could very well be that the word vechen is looser and is not applying to everything in the Mishnah of Yevama, but rather only to the last part that said any type of intercourse, whether partial or full, is considered a full act. And so too, that's true for Yevama, and that's so true for the other adayot and pisulot. That's what it means, and you cannot learn anything about ones. Okay, so hada'a deman, and so now we ask, which one is it telling us that we need a chidush, that we need this sefa to tell us, oh yes, even the partial act is like a full act. For what case? Ilamada adayot, if it's telling us that in the case of adayot, those that are of the highest prohibition, the karet ones, and mitabide shamayim one, mitab in betin ones, lemema adayot yalfina miyevama. Well, then the order wouldn't make sense, because here you're saying, we know this is true for Yevama, and it's also true for adayot, as if adayot is being derived from yibum. But that's not the case when we saw all the derivations. Actually, we first learned it regarding adayot, when it said regarding nida mekora ha'ira, dikad ha'ara'a b'adayot ketiv, right? That was the original source where we knew that partial insertion is full insertion is regarding adayot. So you wouldn't say vechen, it's true for adayot, the same as it was, we already know through yibum. No, we know adayot first, even before yibum. Elamai vechen, so what is that? So we reject this too. And so what is the vechen actually comparing in the second paragraph to the first paragraph? In what way is adayot similar to yibum? Oh, maybe it's talking about that we learn that if someone has intercourse in the unusual way, shelo kedarka, that is considered also an act. And so just like for yibum, if someone performs yibum shelo kedarka, it is considered yibum. So too, if someone violates adayot shelo kedarka, it is considered punishable. Maybe that's what it means. Here too, adraba, no, again, that's the opposite. Ikar mishkebe isha ba'adayot ketib, the source where we learn that both frontal and anal are both considered acts of intercourse, we learn from mishkebe isha, from mishkab zachur, and that's one of the adayot. So you see that it's really from adayot. So you wouldn't say it's true for yibum and it's also true for adayot. No, adayot is the primary place that we learned it from to begin with. Oh, maybe to apply to the prohibitions that are only a lav. Because this one is karet, mishkab zachur is karet, so we wouldn't know that in other cases where it's only a lav, like marrying a chalutza. So for that case, we need vechen to teach me that in those cases, shelo kedarka is also prohibited as is also considered an act and also prohibited, and so that is what the word vechen is coming to teach. And okay, in any case, Rav Sheshat's original proof that he enlightened us from our Mishnah is actually not a great parallel, because that vechen can mean a lot of different things, and does not necessarily mean what he said. All right, now Amar Rava, Eshet Kohen shene'ensa ba'alah loke aleha mishum zona. Okay, back to that topic that Rav Sheshat did bring up, which is someone is married to a Kohen and she is raped. So the husband cannot be with her anymore, and if he remains married to her, he gets lashes because of the pasuk isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. And although she was coerced by some other guy and no fault of her own, so it's really not fair to penalize her. Nevertheless, in terms of the marriage to a Kohen, for him she is called a zona and he cannot be with her anymore. All right, mishum zona. So we ask about this statement. Rava, why'd you say zona? Mishum zona in mishum tum'ah lo. How come you're saying only zona? Shouldn't she also be prohibited in terms of tum'ah? Tum'ah doesn't mean ritual impurity, but rather it means a prohibition that is derived from this pasuk. V'shachab ish ota shichvat zera regarding in the context of sota, it says that if she is with another man, even though there's no witness, but he suspects that she was with another man, she became tameh. So that's the case of sota. So how come Rava didn't say that she's also prohibited to the Kohen because of tum'ah? And we answer, Ema af mishum zona. You're right. What he meant to say is she be prohibited as a sota and also prohibited as a zona. Okay, good. Now we ask, Matib Rav Zera. This says, Vehi lo nitpasa. Rav Zera is gonna challenge this. It says, because it says bala lokeh. Lokeh means chayav malkut for taking her, and he's going to argue that the law of tum'ah is only learned from an aseh, and therefore is not a lav, as would not be punishable by malkut. And so he's challenging this conclusion that Rava said af mishum zona. Okay, poor Rava. First we inserted words into a statement and says, yeah, tum'ah and zona, and then we say, how can you say tum'ah? It's not true. Okay, so but that's what we're going to do. So since the pasuk says vehi lo nitpasa, if she was not forced, then she is called a sota, if she went and committed adultery and was not forced. In that case, asura, she'd prohibited even to a Yisrael. Adulterer is prohibited to back to her husband. Hanit pesa muteret, but if she was taken by force, then she's permitted to go back to her husband, who is Yisrael. Now we make a diuk. Vehi lo nitpasa, only her. Asura. So in a general case, yes, she can go back to her husband if she was raped. But there is a case only she can go back, but not someone else. Who is that other person? Ve'ezo zo eshet kohen, the wife of a kohen, who was even if she was forced, cannot go back to her husband. Velav haba michlal aseh aseh. But this is formulated as an aseh. Right, that she can go back to her husband, right? If she was not forced, so that she can go back is formulated as naseh, and so we derive a not, only her and not someone else, not a kohen. So while that is a prohibition, you do not get lashes for such a prohibition. It has the force of an aseh, and therefore you should not add in the also because of tum'ah. That's Rav Zera's question. Amar Rabba, hakol hayu bichlal zona, כשפרט כתוב גבי אשת איש והיא לא נתפסה אסורה, הנתפסה מותרת מכלל דאשת כהן כדקיימה קיימה. Rabba says, no, I can formulate this in a different way. There's a problem with the generations here. Rabba is earlier than Rava, and this whole question is put into his mouth. Okay, so whatever this meant in the Rabba's original context, we can try to reconstruct. But here, it is brought as an answer. And Rabba's point is that, no, in fact, all women both married to Yisrael and married to a Kohen, are prohibited as zona, and I think what he means here is also as tum'ah, right? They would all be prohibited, even therefore if they went with another man, whether on purpose or raped. But then the pasuk comes and excludes someone, and so the pasuk says regarding Yisrael, "Vehi lo nitpasa." Oh, hold on, that's only if she was not taken by force. Then she would be a sota. But if she's taken, then she's asura and she cannot go back to her husband. Hanit pesa. But if she was taken by force, she was raped. Muteret. She can go back, and therefore the wife of Israel is excluded from the prohibition of remaining of leaving her husband. She can remain with her husband, and therefore that leaves Michlal Deshet Kishkeda Kaima Kaima. So the one who's married to a Kohen, she remains with the original prohibition that she had before, and so it's really not a lav ba Michlal Aseh. It was in fact a lav that applied across the board. And then the wife of Israel who was forced is excluded from it, and so it leaves the original prohibition, and that would be that double prohibition that she, for a Kohen, is both a zona and she is teme'ah, and she cannot remain married to him even if she was raped. and that now supports Rava's original formulation. All right, good. That was all one version of the sugya. V'ika de amre. Amar Rabba, Eshet Kohen shene'ensa ba'ala loke aleha mishum tum'ah. In this version, the statement is said by Rabbah, the third generation Amorah, which makes a lot more sense, because then that would mean he is challenged by Rabbi Zera, also in the third generation, and in this version, the response is by Rava in the fourth generation, the student of Rabbah. So you see, actually, the names make total sense here. In the first version, as it's in the printed editions, you had Rava up here and then the Rabbah down here. So this actually prompts us to check the manuscripts. This is the manuscript of the original version, the first version, where although printed editions have Rava, the older printed editions just have Resh Bet Chupchik. So those are ambiguous, and someone mistakenly expanded it to Rava with an Aleph. The Mesurat HaShas in the Vilna edition does change it to a He, and that has to be correct. The majority, 4 manuscripts have a Rabbah, and 3 manuscripts have a Rava, even though there's a machloket between 2 Geniza fragments, which are usually the best. But in any case, the manuscript evidence, at least the majority of them, support it. The main point you can see here is that Rava and Rabbah are often mixed up, and sometimes they're written just with Resh Bet, and that especially, and also they pronounce the same, and in a way they're basically spelled the same, these 2 different people. So therefore, the best way to tell is from context, by seeing who else is speaking to them and who is responding to them. So the second version here has it correctly. All right, so in this version, Rabbah says that a wife of a Kohen who was raped, Ba'ala, if she has to separate from her husband, if the husband remains with her, he gets lashes. Why? Because of Tum'ah. The original version had only because of zona. This has only because of Tum'ah. Okay, then we ask, Mishum Tuma'in, Mishum Zona Lo, only because of Tum'ah, which in the first version was we associated with Sotah. And how about because of Zona, that special pasuk that regarding Kohen, Isha Zona V'chalala? How come we don't add that also? And the answer is Alma be'ones lo karina bezona. In this version, we say we're more lenient and say, you know what, the zona prohibition does not apply when she's raped. So zona, she not fair to call her a zona when she was coerced into adultery. It's no fault of her own. You can't call that anything negative. She doesn't deserve that label. And so only someone who commits adultery on purpose, that would be called zona, is prohibited to a Kohen. But if it's by mistake, not zona. Nevertheless, they are prohibited from staying with each other because of tum'ah, and tum'ah only. Okay, good. So this makes sense. Also, we don't have to add any words to Rabbah's statement, unlike in the first version where we added words and then we asked a question about those words. So the flow, the interpretation and the flow of this following question makes a lot more sense in this version. Matib Rabbi Zera, vehi lo nitpasa. Hold on, what are you talking about when you say she time'ah from sotah? Because in the case of sotah, when a woman is with another man, then she is prohibited, can't go back to her husband. But it qualifies and says only if she is not forced, then she cannot go back to her husband. Asura hanit pesa muteret, but she was forced, she can go back. But it specifies vehi, only her. This comes to exclude some other woman, where even if she is forced, she cannot go back. Even if she is raped, she cannot go back to her husband. Ve'zozo eshet kohen. Who is that? That's the case of someone married to a kohen. And Rabbi Zera, here's his point. But this is all as an aseh. You're permitted to go back to your husband if it was rape. So that's a permission, and we only learned the prohibition from the positive statement, and therefore should not get lashes. So in this version, that we say she's not a zona, so it's only because of tum'ah, but tum'ah is an aseh and should not require lashes. That's all the question. Amar Rava, hakol hayu bichlal acharei asher hu tama'a. Rava brings a different pasuk. In the first version, he brought a pasuk of zona, but we can't bring that in this version because we just established that zona does not apply to a case of rape. So instead, he's bringing in yet another pasuk that is related, and this is about someone who's married to a man and then they get divorced, and she marries another man and gets divorced or he dies. She is never allowed to go back to her first husband. Lo yuchal ba'ara ishon asher shelcha lashub lekachta liot lo liisha acharei asher hu tama'a. So the word tum'ah is there also. That would be considered tameh for a husband to take her back. And so everyone is included, Rava says, in this prohibition. Asura ha nitpasa muteret bekelal de eshet kohen kedekaima kaima. And about with the same logic as before, he's going to turn this aseh actually into a lav by arguing that everyone originally was prohibited from going back to their husbands if they were with another man, no matter what the circumstances. But then the pasuk regarding sotah says, hold on. Only if he lo nitpas, only if she was not coerced. If she was coerced and it's a Yisrael that is exempt from this law, she can go back to her husband. So that applies to Yisrael, but the Eshet Kohen remains with the original prohibition of not being able to go back to her husband even if she is raped, and so therefore it is in fact a lav and not an aseh, and that explains Rabbah. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.